Hello everybody and welcome back to Middle-earth and another video update for Wainriders, and today we are looking at the Avari. This is one of the 3 elven factions that will appear in the Wainriders mod. This is one of my most anticipated factions, I have to say. The Avari are, of course, the unwilling, those elves who refused the great journey into the west to go and live with the Valar in the Blessed Realm. They decided they were a bit frightened, I guess, of the dark and the rumors of Morgoth, and they decided that it would be better to stay in the lands that they loved and try to survive. And they did. You know, when the elves eventually, when the Noldor and Sindar eventually returned into the eastern parts of Middle-earth, they found elves still living there, much as they had been since the beginning of their history. And so we thought, with the Wainriders taking place in an earlier period of time than Fourth Age, of course, that it made sense to potentially include a small enclave of these elves still living in their basically in their original state in the eastern parts of Middle-earth. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing these guys on campaign, and here they are in battle. So let's just get that going here. We've got first here Avari Riders. This is one of a couple of cavalry units you'll be able to command in as this faction. These guys are very lightly armed skirmishers primarily. They have throwing spears. They do have axes as a melee weapon. But the Avari, one interesting thing about them is they really lack spear cavalry. There are no lancers, no really heavily armed lancer cavalry. These guys are your bodyguard unit, the Avari heroes, and they have bows, of course, very good armor. So at your top tier, and there are only 3 tiers of military development for these guys, at the top tier you can expect some very nice scale armor and just helmets and good all-around equipment. But at your lower tiers, it's going to be very, very light indeed. So these guys, again, are horse archers. This is your bodyguard unit. They have long one-handed blades, similar to this one you can see here, kind of based on the Thracian Rumphia, I think it is, or the Falx. I may be getting these terms wrong, but in any case, we've equipped them in that manner. We have, in general, taken some notes from Thrace, historical Thrace, for this faction, and it's interesting to sort of think of it that way. Early in development, I was really wondering how we were going to get these guys in. How are we going to portray the Avari elves? Because it was important that they look different from the High Elves, the Sindar, the Woodland Realm elves, and so on, as you saw in the Fourth Age. And we were really wondering, how quote-unquote primitive or barbaric should they really look? And so we went in this direction over some really helpful discussions on Discord. So I want to thank everybody involved with those, because it really helped solidify our vision for this faction. And of course, Weba84 has done these models and units more than justice. This is wonderful to see these guys finally in the game. So here we can see some skirmishers who are also equipped very similar to the Avari Riders. Shields, throwing spears, and axes, I believe, is their secondary melee weapon, or possibly it's thrusting spears. We'll take a look potentially later on in the fight. But these guys are going to be your front line in terms of skirmishing. All of these units so far can hide in the open. We'll see if that is the case in the final release of the mod. It may or may not be, but as a relatively stealthy group of elves who are obliged to survive in the harsh, man-infested parts of Middle-earth, probably them being very stealthy makes a lot of sense. Behind the skirmishers, backing them up, we have a unit of Avari bows. These are your basic archer unit, available at your second tier, and they have long spears in addition to bows, making them pretty good against cavalry. Not only will they be able to shoot them down, but they can certainly stand up to them in melee under the right conditions, of course, not being flanked and so on. What else do we have here? Well, the melee contingent is interesting. So there's not a lot of the heavily armed stand-and-fight melee types. The best armor by far is on your bodyguard and on these guys, Avari Warriors, which are another Tier 3 unit. So these are armored and equipped very similar to your bodyguard unit, except these are on foot. So they have bows as well as two-handed long curved blades for melee. But very good armor, but again, no shield, so they're not going to be the most stand-up in a melee situation. For your basic melee without any ranged capability, we have 2 options. At your first tier, you will find Avari Spears, very decent spear unit, but again, very low armor, no helmets, but shields at least. And Avari swords over here, also wielding that curved blade with some light helmets and bracers and such to help them stand up a bit. So that's it. I believe that's something like 6 units, together with some faction-specific mercenaries that we'll see potentially a bit later. But this is a small but extremely focused roster, and I think it'll make for some interesting play. You'll have to rely on your skirmishers quite a bit, both cavalry and infantry, and you'll have to time your charges correctly because you don't have a lot of units that can stand up to a lot of fighting, at least compared to some of the other elven troops that you may be familiar with from 4th Age Total War, where they can just tank pretty much endlessly. So this is a faction that's going to have to pick its fights, both strategically and tactically. Strategically, they're going to start off in the vicinity of the Sea of Rune, so it makes sense for them to be in the eastern parts of Middle-earth. But of course, that is going to be the prime territory for the Wainriders themselves, and that means you're going to be up against 2 very powerful factions very early on. And so I imagine this to be one of the more difficult campaigns in the mod, which only makes sense. But I can already picture myself playing an Avari campaign, potentially taking the fight to the Wainriders, but also maybe doing a crusade against the Noldor. I mean, those guys returned from the west, and Middle-earth really suffered ever since then, at least maybe from these guys' perspective. So for the Avari, it might be interesting to head into the Woodland Realm, to maybe even head to Lorien to try to conquer the Grey Havens. I mean, it would be a very weird campaign, but something about that really appeals to me. So here we see some Avari swords going toe-to-toe with Wainrider chieftains. These are an elite Wainrider unit, of course. And this unit, at least in the current balance, is able to just beat these guys. So these are a tier 2 unit. I believe the Wainrider chieftains are something like tier 3 or 4. Now, again, balancing is going to be something that we definitely revisit, but we'll see. This seems fairly reasonable. I mean, I'm glad that they beat these guys, at least in this matchup. It makes sense that a tier 2 unit would at least be able to stand up to them to some extent, but suffer eventually. We do have some War Wains coming in, and I think, honestly, this is a very strange battle in terms of the AI, and it's probably because all of our units are hidden, and so the AI is just going through all of the forests to try to find where we are, not thinking that, of course, we're going to be up on the hill here. But as a result, we have to go and march into the woods and cut them down one by one. So I'm not going to show you all of that, but here we're cutting down the chariots, and they had several cavalry units that if you were playing as, say, the Western Horde, as one of the Wainrider factions, I think you would have a decent time taking out the Avari, because you could send your chariots after their cavalry, cut them to ribbons, and send your cavalry after their light infantry and do some hammer and anvil stuff, and it would be pretty straightforward, I think, as long as you didn't stand around to get shot up by their range units and didn't let yourself fight too much in the woods, where these guys will have some combat advantage. So I hope you enjoyed this preview of the Avari. We do have another Elven faction left to preview. That would be the High Elves that you can expect to find over in the Grey Havens and the western parts of Middle-earth. But this is the underdog, so to speak, of the Elven faction. So I think they'll make an interesting one. Follow us for more information at this channel, but also at TotalWarCenter.net, where you can find threads on 4th Age Total War, as well as the upcoming Wainriders release. And you can check us out on Discord as well for more discussion. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great day, everybody.